Journeys Through Spacetime by James Talisman. Chapter 3 EarthVerse-Contradictions of Thought. Present-day Boulder, Colorado. That was strange. Those words felt so real. What did they mean? Contemplated Matt as he laid looking up at the ceiling. I wish they were here now, so we could talk about this, Matt yearned as thoughts of his parents came to mind. Not particularly religious, Matt said a short prayer for his parents before finally drifting off to sleep. After a restless night pondering the previous event at last night's Krav Maga class, an irritating alarm made Matt jolt awake. Smacking the alarm clock to silence it, Matt saw it read 7 a.m. and groaned to himself. The first class for the day was advanced calculus at 8 a.m. Matt quickly jumped out of bed to get ready. Wednesday's schedule was both grueling and fascinating. Along with the math class and general chemistry in the morning, Matt would spend the afternoon doing lab work for his quantum mechanics course. After grabbing some quick coffee and toast, Matt reached for his backpack and bolted out the door. Normally he would ride his mountain bike to class. Running late, he had ordered an Uber ride. Pulling up to the Colorado University of Boulder front entrance, Matt quickly paid the Uber driver and ran up the steps before going inside. "Glad you could join us, Mr. Larson," lamented Professor Johnson as Matt quickly took a seat. Fortunately, he was a good student, so his lateness would go no further than his public call-out this time. As the professor continued his lecture on the Fubini theorem, Matt sat staring at the overhead in front of him while his mind was elsewhere. What previous lessons should I be remembering and why is it so important? Pondered Matt, as he continued to stare at the overheads. Maybe Julia and Dan can help me figure this out when we meet for lunch, thought Matt, as he attempted to refocus his mind on Professor Johnson's lecture. Soon, the math class was over. After an uneventful chemistry class, Matt headed outside to meet Dan and Julia. "Hey there, beautiful," Matt called out as he walked over to Julia and Dan. "Why thank you, handsome," joked Dan as Matt put his arm around Julia and gave her a big kiss. "Oh, you're beautiful too," Matt teased his longtime friend as he took Julia's hand. Julia looked at her two male companions. "So where should we go for lunch today?" "How about Dion's? Today is 2-for-1 pizza and beer," said Dan while rubbing his stomach. "Pizza sounds great but no beer for me. I have an important lab later," replied Matt. "Then it's settled, boys," declared Julia before they all started walking towards one of their favorite restaurants. "Damn, this pizza smells good and tastes incredible," exclaimed Dan as he devoured the meat lovers' pizza just brought to their table. "So did your morning go okay, Matt? Dan filled me in on last night's incident at Krav Maga," inquired Julia to her boyfriend of 2 years. "Yeah, I'm okay, but I did want to talk with you too about what occurred when I passed out," answered Matt. "No problem, buddy. What's on your mind?" asked Dan before taking a swig from his beer mug. "Well, it's funny you should ask about what's on my mind because I actually heard a voice in my head after I blacked out last night," replied Matt. "Really? So what did this voice say to you?" Julia asked. "This unknown voice in my head said that it must leave me for a while, but that I should remember some sort of lessons from the past." The table was silent for a while as everyone pondered the words Matt had heard in his head. Dan looked at Matt and said, "Maybe you are supposed to recall some of your martial arts lessons from before we started training in Krav Maga." "Maybe, but this kind of felt like it was something intellectual that I should remember," replied Matt. "I remember you telling me a few times about the lessons your parents gave you when you were younger," Julia recalled. "Yeah, that might be it," said Matt, as he began to recall the esoteric wisdom his parents had continuously tried to drill into him when he was younger. While Matt's dad had been a physicist and his mum a psychiatrist, both his parents were avid students of ancient esoteric teachings surrounding the nature of reality. It was Matt's parents who introduced him to meditation during that time. While not remembering most of those earlier teachings, Matt did try to meditate as often as he could. Matt nodded to himself before looking at the attractive and athletic young woman seated next to him. Thanks for reminding me about those earlier teachings. While it's all still kind of fuzzy, that may be what I'm supposed to remember. I just wish I knew who and what this strange voice was. You are welcome, babe. Maybe we could get together later at your place and watch some Netflix, Julia coyly suggested as they all got up and headed out of the restaurant. I would love that, shot back Matt as they walked outside. They all stood just outside the restaurant on the sidewalk. Well, I'll see you two lovebirds later. I've actually got this cool Python program waiting for me at home, Dan told his two friends before walking off down the street towards his apartment. See you later, computer geek. Hope you have fun with that tonight, laughed Matt as he and Julia headed back the other direction towards campus. As Matt walked into the quantum mechanics lab, his spirits rose as he pondered what new concept he might learn that day. While pursuing a degree in physics was a grueling task, learning about the underlying structure of matter and energy was interesting to him. Matt and his lab partners would be performing the now famous double-slit experiment. The basic premise of the experiment was to show that light and even matter can display characteristics of both waves and particles at the same time. As Matt and his lab partners shined a light at the plate with two slits, a rear screen started to capture particle points behind each slit as expected. Over time, an interference pattern on the rear screen showed that the light going through the two separate slits was recombining to form more of a wave-type pattern onto the rear screen. Just as the results of this experiment had shown countless other times, Matt and his lab partners once again demonstrated the principle of wave-particle duality. Later that evening, Matt answered the knock at his apartment door and found his best friend standing outside the door in a sexy black dress, revealing the loveliest legs he had ever seen. Well, hello, beautiful. Please come in, said Matt as he gestured for Julia to come inside. I hope you like this wine. It's a new red I thought might be nice to try, said Julia as she walked through the door. You and the wine look spectacular, exclaimed Matt. I hope Chinese food is okay. Sounds perfect, said Julia as she headed to the kitchen to find a wine bottle opener. After a dinner of Chinese food and wine, Matt and Julia retired to the couch. Cuddled on Matt's chest, Julia asked, Have you put any more thought into those words you heard in your head? I think it may have something to do with my childhood lessons, so I want to start checking that out. Right now I have something far more important to check out, answered Matt as he began to rub Julia's inner thigh. Feeling restless later that night, Matt quietly rose from bed so he would not wake Julia. Opening the laptop at his desk, Matt began searching the term esoteric wisdom to see if he could jog his memory. As Matt began researching material surrounding his childhood lessons, memories of his parents came to mind again. A quick search once more revealed the original Denver Post article that recounted the tragic accident his parents had while traveling Colorado's $1 Million Highway on US 550, between the small towns of Durango and Ouray almost 4 years ago. While this route could indeed be treacherous at times and would be closed often during the winter months, Matt's parents had drove this stretch of highway many times before, and the time of the accident was early summer. Matt had questioned many things concerning the accident, but the response from local authorities did not seem to offer any decent answers. The first responders to the accident said the vehicle had been traveling faster than it should have on that curve before it went over the steep cliff, and after most likely rolling over numerous times, the vehicle had burst into flames in the gorge floor below. Authorities had also indicated that due to the intense heat from the flames, both bodies in the car had been reduced to ash by the time rescuers arrived at the final crash site. After waiting a couple days for the investigation to be completed, Matt was given what remained of his mother and father. Totally grief-stricken, Matt drove back to the family home in Denver. All the way back to Denver, Matt continued to try and make sense of the tragedy, and come to grips with the terrible loss he now faced. This does not seem real. I just can't believe they are gone, thought Matt as he continued towards Denver. Once back in Denver, Matt remained dazed throughout the funeral arrangements and burial. It was not until 3 months later that Matt finally came to terms with the fact that his parents were not going to return. Matt had already been accepted at CU of Boulder before his parents' deaths. He pondered whether he should continue with those plans. After much soul-searching and encouragement from family on both sides, Matt decided that attending college had always been his parents' wish, and he would be able to honor them by moving forward with his original intention. After the sale of the family home and proceeds from life insurance claims, Matt was able to pay his entire tuition obligation and still have money to support himself while he attended the university. After reliving the old memories of his parents' deaths, Matt thought to himself, "I'm not sure where this will lead. For my parents' sake and memory, I must once again pursue this path I started with my parents so long ago." With new purpose, Matt began to dig into the many sites that had come up during his search of the term esoteric wisdom. Present-day New Haven, Connecticut. As a political science undergraduate student at Yale University, Thomas P. Halloway IV was most likely headed for a career in politics. Currently serving as student body president, he had already started making connections with both key students and Yale alumni members. Armed with a quick wit and strong intellect, he was popular with his fellow students and most of the faculty at Yale. As a fifth-generation Halloway, Thomas was from a family of wealth and influence. The Halloway family fortune was originally made in the trades business, and now Halloway enterprises spanned the globe with divisions in retail trade and manufacturing. While most of the Halloways ended up in the family business, Thomas's parents felt that his charming personality and above-average intellect would best serve Halloway enterprises in the political arena. He happily agreed with his parents' wishes and began preparing for his future at an early age. "We still on tonight for the Ellis Club?" Stuart called out to Thomas as they crossed paths in the hallway. "Absolutely, my Scottish hunk of a friend," replied Thomas. "Awesome, been looking forward to finding some hookups and prime Scotch whiskey," shouted Stuart as Thomas continued down the hall to his next class. While the usual college party scene was not of huge interest to Thomas, he would occasionally accept one of the many invitations he got, so that he could expand his network of connections. Along with being popular with Yale students, the Ellis Club was also a favorite gathering place for Yale faculty and alumni members. The name Ellis was a nickname reference to Elihu Yale, a Welsh merchant for whom Yale College was named in 1718. It was of no surprise that the Ellis Club embodied everything that made the Ivy League university what it was. Even for the elite members of society, walking into the Ellis Club was a treat to the senses. Using a combination of both old and new, the Ellis Club spoke both old money and high-tech design throughout its spacious and decadent main lounge and adjoining private meeting areas. Modern alternative rock was currently pumping through the elaborate sound and speaker system. These sounds would switch to popular dance hits as the evening progressed and pretty college co-eds began moving to the dance floor. As Thomas walked through the huge mahogany entrance doors, he too could not help but be amazed at the spectacle in front of him. 30 to 40 young and chic people in very expensive clothes were already moving about the grand lounge, engaged in conversation and laughter. In the adjoining more private areas of the club, older, more distinguished gentlemen and ladies could be seen smoking cigars and drinking wine, while engaging in what was most likely business and political talk. "Hey Thomas, come on over, I want to introduce you to a couple new friends," exclaimed Stuart as he gestured to two very lovely young college students. Having already downed a couple Macallan single malts, Stuart was already feeling festive and talkative. "Thomas, please meet Catherine and Jessica." "Well, hello ladies. It's a pleasure to meet you both," said Thomas as he reached out to give each of his fellow Yale students a quick hug. "You have outdone yourself, my man," Thomas whispered in Stuart's ear as he gave his friend a hug. "I thought you might like. They are freshmen too," Stuart whispered back. Catherine smiled at Thomas. "You're Thomas Halloway. I've seen your face on posters all over campus. Yes, they are probably old campaign posters, laughed Thomas as he smiled back at Catherine. You must be majoring in political science, being student body president and all, inquired Catherine. I am indeed. Are you interested in politics, Catherine? Thomas asked the young co-ed. I'm interested in some aspects of politics, Catherine coyly replied. Another fellow classmate came up to Thomas and whispered in his ear, Senator Goldstein is in the other room. She would like to meet you to discuss a proposition. Thomas looked towards the two young women. I'm so sorry, ladies, but I must leave for a bit. Please by all means stick around if you can. I'm sure my big hunk friend here can get you both another drink if you want. Thomas put his hand on Stuart's shoulder and smiled before turning to leave with the senator's assistant. It would be my pleasure, ladies, Stuart assured his two new friends as he gestured to the bartender. Thomas walked over to Senator Goldstein's table with the senator's assistant. He reached out his hand towards the senator sitting with an entourage of people. It's such a pleasure to finally meet you, Senator. I'm a huge fan of your work on the Wetlands Environmental Act. It's wonderful to meet you as well, Mr. Halloway, replied the senator as she looked Thomas up and down. I asked Lance to track you down when I heard you might be here tonight. Please sit down with us and have a drink, said Senator Goldstein as she gestured for Thomas to have a seat. As she poured him a glass of wine, Senator Goldstein put her hand on Thomas's hand and said, Since Karen left, we have been searching for a new assistant to help with various matters. I have been hearing good things about you. I wanted to see if you might be a good candidate for the position. Obviously, I'm a bit biased, but I don't think you'll find anyone more capable or willing to do whatever it takes to keep you happy and successful, joked Thomas as he stared into the senator's eyes. Well then, Mr. Halloway, you have definitely created a great first impression. Let me think on the matter and we'll be in touch, remarked the senator as she picked up her phone to call her driver. Once Senator Goldstein and her entourage left, Thomas headed back to hook up with Stuart and his two lovely new friends. In full party mode now, Stuart and the two gorgeous young ladies were dancing together on the expensive maple dance floor. Thomas danced up behind Catherine while moving in close. As Catherine pushed her well-rounded butt up against him, he reached both hands around her waist as they began to bump and grind to the dance music. Wow, this is a very nice place you have, Thomas Halloway, exclaimed Catherine as she walked into the bungalow Thomas owned in Morris Cove. Well, thank you. You'll have to stay the night so we can get breakfast on the harbor waterside in the morning, replied Thomas as he closed the door. So is that the line you use with all your guests? Asked Catherine as she began to take off her jacket. Thomas smiled at the beautiful co-ed and said, Only the beautiful, sexy and interesting ones. He took off his jacket and threw it over the couch. Already worked up from the steamy dancing at the club, it was not long before both Thomas and Catherine undressed each other. She unzipped his pants and began to pleasure him. After a short time, Thomas playfully threw Catherine back onto the sofa. After removing her pretty lace panties, he put his head between her legs and gave her the first orgasm of the night. Flipping her onto her stomach, he entered her and began to rhythmically thrust his engorged member inside. Catherine soon succumbed to a strange force that almost made her pass out. While the experience was arousing and made her orgasm, something inside felt strange. As Thomas continued moving inside her, she could hear guttural sounds coming from him until he growled loudly and ejaculated. Finished, Thomas rolled over onto his back and dozed off. As her mind started to clear, Catherine lay beside the young heir to the Halloway fortune, looking up at the ceiling. That was so strange. It felt like someone else was there with us. A short while later, Thomas woke to the sounds of Catherine quietly getting dressed. Leaving so soon? I thought we were going to get breakfast in the morning. I have an early class, muttered Catherine as she quickly finished putting on her shoes and started for the door. "Perhaps we can do this again soon?" asked Thomas as a wicked smile came over his face. Hurrying out the door, Catherine did not respond or look back. She headed out to the street to catch the Uber she had called as the front door slammed shut behind her. Feeling very satisfied, Thomas rolled onto his side and fell back to sleep. Thomas woke to warm morning sun shining into his bedroom. Grabbing some English muffins and orange juice, he went out onto the rear deck to take in the harbor and the boats sailing in the distance. "I think today would be a great day to get out there and see things from the other side," he thought, as he continued to stare out at the harbor. Soon a bing sounded on his phone. Looking at the new text, Thomas saw the letters and numbers DOH 830. The cryptic text indicated that he would be going somewhere later, that evening. After finishing breakfast, Thomas walked down to the docks until he came upon a small sailing vessel called World's Mine. Climbing aboard, he released the moorings. The boat began to drift away from the dock. He used a small trolling motor to get the vessel aligned with a slight breeze before engaging the sails. Soon, the sailing vessel began to pick up speed as it headed out further into the harbor. Thomas piloted the vessel north past the east shore, and as the wind shifted, he steered the vessel south past Lighthouse Point Park. He always enjoyed taking his boat out onto the waters. The sea was the one place he could get away from all the responsibilities the Halloway name carried. While he loved his family, there were times that being a Halloway carried burdens he was not always comfortable with. As water lapped against the side of the boat and sea breeze lightly touched his face, Thomas began to feel very relaxed. Soon after, the ringing of his phone brought him out of his meditative state. "Hi, this is Thomas." "Hi Thomas, this is Senator Goldstein's aide Lance. The senator would like to meet at her office in Washington later next week to go over your new responsibilities. We will be in touch once we have a firm date and time." "Thank you, Lance. Please tell Senator Goldstein I look forward to our meeting." "I will, Mr. Halloway. Have a good day." A smile came over Thomas's face as he contemplated this great opportunity. Steering the vessel back towards the dock, he began to prepare his mind for the events later that evening.